Okay.
So we're live now with the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. I'm Mark Lawrence, the Senate Chair of the committee, and we are going to have a series of presentations today, and we're going to have work sessions following that. And we have had some changes to what appears on the top of the website. So you should scroll down and look at the document that appears on the lower right hand of the screen to find out exactly what we're planning to do today. We do have a couple of different presentations, and one of them is from the Connect Me Authority, and we did have a request from Mr. Butcher to go try to get out by 10 o'clock because of conflicts. And so we'll go first to Andrew Busher and Peggy Schaefer. If you could beam them over, Jason, and we'll ask them to do their presentation. Good morning, Andrew. Are you all set to begin?
Good morning, I am. Thank you, Senator Lawrence. I see Peggy Schaefer patching over as well. If it's okay, if it pleases the committee, I think I'll be given a quick update and progress report on activities with the Maine Connectivity Authority in tandem to her update and report for Connect Maine.
Okay. And I apologize, Andrew, I forgot to allow committee members a chance to introduce themselves. So we have only about half the committee here today, and that's because all committee members have multiple activities going on at the same time. Other legislative committees are meeting that they have to be in on those meetings, and some of our members serve on multiple committees, but we do have a quorum here of 7 members, and I'm going to ask my co-chair to introduce himself first.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Seth Berry. I represent House District 55, which is Bowdoin, Bowdenham, almost all of Richmond, and beautiful Swan Island on the Kennebec.
Thank you, Representative Berry. And then I'm going to go to Senator Vitelli.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Eloise Vitelli. I represent all of Saginaw County and the town of Dresden in Lincoln County.
Representative Cuddy.
Good morning. My name is Scott Cuddy. I represent House District 98, which is Winterport, Frankfort, Searsport, and Swanville, and I reside in Winterport.
Representative Foster.
Good morning. I'm Steve Foster. I represent District 104, which includes 5 towns: Dexter, Garland, Charleston, Stetson, and Exeter.
Representative Kessler.
Hi, my name is Chris Kessler, representing part of South Portland and part of Cape Elizabeth.
Representative Grahowski.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Grahowski. I represent House District 132 of the city of Ellsworth in the town of Trenton.
Okay. And for members of the public, you may see members coming in and out. As I've said, they all have multiple Zooms to do this morning on various committees. And we're trying at this point in the legislative session to keep things moving along at a good pace. So members are placing priorities on committees where they actually have work sessions or public hearings. So they'll be popping in and out. And as different people pop in, I'll have them introduce themselves. We are here this morning, first off, for presentations. So that has, not that it's less important, but in the process of trying to get all legislation out of committees, legislators are placing priority on working bills right now and completing their public hearings. So I do apologize, Andrew, and we'll go back to your presentation.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for the opportunity to catch you up. As I mentioned, I think Peggy and I are planning on a little bit of a tag team conversation, if that's okay. My goal, by way of update on the Maine Connectivity Authority would just be to provide you with an update on our priorities and progress, and respond to whatever questions you all may have. As you saw, our official legislative report submission was quite light, as we are brand new. So there were no activities to report in the last year, as I have started in my official capacity this year. And so thank you all once again for that opportunity. So if it works for you, Peggy, I'll just go through a couple quick priorities and progress report, and then I imagine the most amount of juicy conversation will be on the Connect Main sides of things. And again, I am sorry about my time limitations today. I think we'll be good by 10 o'clock, and I do apologize. I'll have to jump by 10. I don't think I need to go through our intent and design and purpose for the Connectivity Authority with this committee. And I do apologize. I don't have an official slide deck or presentation to share with you at this point. It's been a busy couple months. So I'm just going to talk through our priorities and progress. And some of you who were a part of last night's broadband caucus heard a little bit of this discussion as well. As a brand new agency, we have, I think, 3 simultaneous priorities, and they are to get our federal funding relief funds in motion as quickly as possible, to scale up our organization to ensure the ability to sustain the unprecedented opportunity before us, and to ultimately develop and execute a strategy that serves as a roadmap both for us as an organization, as well as provides clarity and transparency for our network of partners, public and private and community. So just progress on those fronts, working backwards. Hopefully folks have seen the strategic summary that is posted on the Main Connectivity Authority website. That strategic summary serves as a distillation of 6 months of stakeholder engagement and board strategy, very much serving as a roadmap that distills, really 3 priority focus areas: projects that optimize deployment and reduce barriers, focus on places to reach the last mile and build upon our existing capacity towards community-driven regional scale approaches, and a focus around people that advances digital equity across multiple sectors and silos. Those strategic focus areas then unpack into a series of activities, which I am executing on and building staff around. I'm pleased to share that we have a CFO hired who will be joining in March. That announcement will be official next week. And it's a tremendous addition to the team, somebody with a pretty significant experience around large-scale financing, development, and partnerships, which, as you know, is a sort of key feature of the authority. This individual has been hired out of a competitive search that received national applications. I think we feel very excited about that. We are hiring an operations administrator to start in March, and then I am also hopefully in the next week putting out job descriptions for 3 new positions, and ultimately aiming to hire 7 to 8 by midsummer, so that we will be fully operational, in addition to building upon the strong partnership with Connect Main, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I will also just note, I really appreciate all of your collective support in spreading the word around emerging opportunities for the authority. I'm really pleased to see that I've seen some great candidates from some of your districts, I presume, due to the work that you've helped spread the news around. So I appreciate your partnership and support along those lines. And, as we continue to staff up, that will continue to be important. The other sort of key point of progress to highlight is, hopefully you all have noted, and I included in my legislative report to you as well. I'm very pleased that the Connectivity Authority Board approved an allocation of 10 million of funds to Connect Main at our January board meeting. Again, that sort of follows through on the commitment to get money moving as quickly as possible. And those funds stack with the existing remaining bond funds that Connect Main has been distributing, for a total available pool of 16.5 million for the current spring infrastructure grant round, which is significant in that I believe it's the most funds made available to communities at any given time. And so that also represents an opportunity for Peggy and team and I to be able to map out how we will adapt and iterate that last mile grants program, which will be administered by the Connectivity Authority starting this summer. That partnership, which I'm sure Peggy and I will talk a little bit more about, I feel like is strong. And I think it was a very clear message from this committee and all of our collective stakeholders that we don't want to disrupt the marketplace. And we want to be able to flex our muscle and do things in new ways. And so we are we've got an MOU that describes as much, and I think provides us with a pretty good roadmap for how to get there. I also just want to highlight that I think a key feature of the Connectivity Authority is our ability to proactively engage new partnerships and to focus on interagency collaboration, which was a key feature identified in our stakeholder engagement and board strategy. And I'm really pleased to share that we have an active collaboration with the State Department of Transportation, and the Intelligent Transportation Systems Group engaged me very early to partner on a feasibility study of understanding how and where to leverage our transportation assets to address not just our transportation communication needs, but ultimately the state's connectivity needs. There's a lot of roads, there's a lot of access to rights of way, there's a lot of infrastructure for shared use. Understanding what that looks like and what the technology and the financial implications are is step one, and we are underway with a feasibility assessment to do so, in addition to sharing a staff member. So yesterday we had we were invited to share with a network of state broadband leaders how Maine is advancing interagency collaboration, and Connect Maine's Stephanie McLagan and the Department of Transportation's Colby Fortier-Brown spoke to how those interagency collaborations are taking shape. So I think it's a really good thing that Maine is getting showcased nationally for this orientation. So I'll pause there because I feel like I'm talking too long. I'm happy to respond to questions that folks have. And I'm also happy to tag in with Peggy as we drill into specifics around our partnership with Connect Maine and the Connectivity Authority.
Great, Andrew. Thank you. Now, did you want Peggy to present something first before questions, or do you want to go directly to questions and have Peggy come in for technical answers?
As I think, as you please, whatever
Okay.
is preference for you all.
So why don't we go ahead with questions, and then we'll have Peggy join us when she needs to answer something specifically on a question. So are there questions from the committee for Andrew? Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, President Butcher, for giving us a little update on the Maine Connectivity Authority. So last night, as you referenced at the Legislative Broadband Caucus, we spoke a bit about the governor's announcement last week, her pledge, as she called it, that by 2024, every Maine resident who wishes to have high-speed internet will be able to have it. And that was, obviously a big announcement, and it pushes up the timetable considerably from, what we have spoken about in the past. So I just want to ask you to comment on the feasibility of that goal as you understand it, with the work of the Connect Maine Authority, the resources you have, and in particular, what will be needed from the legislature to make sure that we can live up to that pledge.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that. I was about to dive into it, but I also realized I didn't want to hold the floor for too long. We spoke about it last night, but just to emphasize, this is an incredibly bold and exciting goal. And I feel like the immediate response is that we can do it, and we will do it, and we have to do it. And it comes from a recognition that is baked into the charter for the Connectivity Authority that I heard time and time again from members of this committee and beyond. We can't be looking at the scale of investment. We can't be looking at creating our future internet infrastructure and redefining our economy while close to 80,000 households are still without service. And so due to the good work that Connect Maine has facilitated in the creation of their broadband intelligence platform, we now have a much better understanding of where those premises are, and now the ability to think strategically around how we provide incremental and phased connectivity for those that don't have it. So the pledge means really three important things from a connectivity authority standpoint. First, we have to continue investing in the community-driven approach that has been working in Maine. With our market and geographic conditions, a community-driven approach represents the best way of identifying potential market demand, which equates to take rate, which equates to sustainable investments. So we will continue investing in that, and we will continue to iterate and refine that which is working now and be proactive about addressing that which has not been working as well as it could. Secondly, as you all well know, this is an opportunity to reshape our internet ecosystem and to be strategic around the backbone and middle mile investments that we can make that create a more competitive and more fair and more affordable landscape for the private sector and ultimately for consumers. And so we've not really had that ability to make those choices. And even if you go back and you look at our decisions around investments in the three-ring binder, that was a singular investment that had a number of its own constraints and parameters. Ultimately, as a state, it allowed for some progress, and it also allowed for some value to remain on the table. We should be strategic and proactive in thinking about how to capture that value long term. And we can do that in parallel to investing in that community process. And simultaneously to that, the third priority is that we have to invest in and embrace alternative technologies where appropriate. This does mean partnerships and investments in fixed wireless solutions and other technologies that will enable short-term connectivity for those that don't have it, but to be strategic around how that fits into a broader approach at a regional scale, so that those short-term investments allow for a pathway for consumers and businesses to be able to not have to give up the long-term benefit of the longer-term set of solutions. So all that to sort of say, I'm really pleased that the governor's call to action is a call to action for us all. It's not a statement that the Connectivity Authority is going to be solving it all. We have an unbelievable opportunity to do so, but it has to be in alignment with the way in which municipalities and counties and regional partnerships are looking at their solutions. So I think it's an excellent call to action for all of us, and it certainly is in line with the strategy and the priorities that have been developed for the Connectivity Authority. And I know Peggy has additional thoughts and perspective on it as well. And so I'm happy to have her speak to that. But Representative Barry, is this a helpful response to your question?
It helps with one part of it. I heard you say that we can do this and that we all need to play a part. And I guess just to put a finer point on the question that I have, given the very brief time remaining for this legislature to take action, what, if anything, do you need from us? Whether it's statutory authorities, whether it is efforts to rally the troops back home, or whether it is resources, because as you know, legal changes and resources, for that matter, community conversations take time, and we're talking about a 2-year time frame for this this pledge to become reality. So, yeah. I think now is the time. If there will be a time to ask us for anything that the legislature can do to assist.
Well, first of all, thank you for that that orientation and that opportunity. As a career and having a career in entrepreneurship and nonprofit management, the orientation should always be to say yes. And so I guess I'll take the opportunity to convey that sentiment to our board and partners and see if I can get you a more specific set of responses, because I absolutely hear the offer and want to take you up on it. And in the short term, I think, part of our recognition is that right now, I think one of the biggest things that would be helpful is the amplification of the general sentiment that we can do these things in parallel. We can continue investing in communities. We can continue, we can build out our middle mile, and we can embrace alternative technologies in a way that's not mutually exclusive. So helping manage the listening, I think unfortunately I had people reach out to me and say, so does this mean we're going to be spending all of our money on Starlink? No, this is not what that means. And other people coming to us and saying, oh, so we don't need to do anything anymore. No, that is not what this means. And so your help in amplifying that everybody still, if you're working towards this, you need to keep pulling, and you actually need to help make your priorities as clear as possible to us. And we need to be, we are building out as many pathways as possible to understand what those priorities are at a place-based level. So your help in amplifying that everybody still has an important job to do here, and that we can do more than one thing at once. One size does not fit all. And we've actually, in my limited time in working with our communities in our state, I don't think that in recent history we've ever really had the opportunity to embrace multiple strategies at once. I don't want to say it's been all or nothing, but we've had limited resources and limited capacity. We certainly don't have unlimited resources and unlimited capacity, because resources and capacity are always an issue, but we have a much bigger opportunity, and we can do things in parallel. And that's what probably I need the most help in amplifying. And then even more so, just to be very specific about it, we will be building out and expanding upon the criteria for grants and financing opportunities. I think it's really, really important that localities, municipalities, and counties have a meaningful stake in the solutions that we look at. And many of our counties and municipalities are being strategic and proactive about that. And there's a lot of great examples to point to. And I think some are feeling that they should hedge their bets. And I get that limited resources needs to be spread a lot of different ways, but there needs to be some level of engagement and participation with municipalities and counties, especially as it pertains to allocation of rescue plan resources. So I think your help in amplifying that message, I think, is sort of the threshold. And again, allow me the opportunity to get back to you with any further thoughts or requests as Peggy and I consult with our boards and stakeholders.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair.
Great, go ahead, Representative Berry.
It would be fantastic to have, as a follow-up to this conversation, just a punch list of what specifically, as possible, is needed or desirable from legislators generally, to help you to carry this work forward. And I'll certainly want to invite Director Schaefer to comment on the same set of questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Butcher, for being here this morning and for your presentation. Following up on Representative Berry's questioning, this time frame this goal that's been set by the Chief Executive certainly is a short one when we consider where we are and how long ago we started on this broadband project, if you will. My question is, and certainly Connect Maine is in the middle of all this. It's not like even though the authority is just getting started and still has a lot of work to do to get to a full functioning entity, if you will. Projects are ongoing right now, have been completed, and are on the drawing board, so to speak. My question is, do we think it's possible with the constraints on materials that we have, and of course the increasing costs of materials, and the commitment to get to that last person on that last mile, their residents with broadband. Do you think that that's really possible in the time frame that the governor has set for you?
The short answer to your question, Representative Foster, and thank you for that. And thank you for the acknowledgement that time, materials, and labor are pretty important considerations in the grand scheme of things. And they are the kinds of things that I think haunt us all as we look at long-term and strategic investments. The short answer to your question is yes. And what I will say, and I think folks from this committee probably well know, and I think as has been pretty clear from a state policy standpoint, investments in fiber infrastructure is the gold standard that we should be aiming for and aspiring for. And where possible, I think we want to enable that, and we want to be strategic and as stewards of public funds to be able to invest in those kinds of long-term, future-oriented infrastructure for businesses, consumers, residents. And, you know, I think we hear loud and clear that there are many, many businesses, consumers, and households that can't afford to wait the time that it's going to take for those projects to come together, the resources to be secured, and the finances to be in place. And we acknowledge that. And so that's why in part of my response to the governor's pledge, this does mean that to reach many of those remote and hard to connect premises, we are going to have to invest in partnerships for non-wired solutions and being strategic about that. And so, you know, I think to your question, there are a number of places that we're going to have to embrace that. And I think it's a recognition that if you have to make choices between whether you can be on a work Zoom or whether your child can participate in remote school, or you know your parent has to visit with their doctor, we shouldn't be forced to make those kinds of choices and trade-offs. And we've heard loud and clear that people don't want to have to wait for a perfect solution. And so again, it's this sentiment of we can do multiple, we can embrace multiple strategies in parallel. So I know Peggy's probably going to have some additional thoughts in response to that, but just to clarify and to emphasize, this is a recognition that we will embrace strategic partnerships for non-wired solutions in strategic places.
Thank you, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Take that as a yes.
Go ahead, Representative Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. And as a follow-up, and you've touched on this already, it was a question I was going to have for you. I think I've kind of got an answer. Obviously, and Ms. Shaver can testify to this fact, that I've always talked about making sure we get the most fiber, most connection per dollar that we can. And I think you and I think I brought that up during your confirmation. But my question is, there's currently a bill that was held over that was a bipartisan bill, LD 1107, Senator Stewart and Senator Jackson sponsored, for assisting in this matter, if you will, to allow some folks the ability to acquire satellite broadband. I know that even folks who are currently living where fiber optic broadband is available are converting over, and I know now it's spread throughout, you know, the zone that's where that Starlink, for instance, is available, has spread to my area. And I've talked to folks that have multiple devices, and they're carrying those very well without the buffering that I'm seeing with my fiber optic cable, and you know, when I'm watching the news or whatever. I'm wondering if the position has now possibly changed, because whenever this was brought up before and during the hearing on 1107, we pretty much were told that satellite was not an option, that fiber was the answer, and that was it. And that question, even before that, when it was brought up, that was the answer. So I'm wondering if you can just confirm that that has changed, and if you would make sure that we are looking at that, possibly that bill, maybe amending it to utilize that to help out, if that's necessary, as Representative Berry referred to in your list of things you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Foster. I'm really glad that you're bringing this bill and this question up. Thank you so much for asking it. I remember well. Actually, I think it was one that I testified on in particular. I'm really pleased to say that I've actually spoken with Senator Stewart. I don't think he's here right now. I have spoken with Senator Stewart in follow-up several times about that bill, and my sentiment remains the same in that I don't think that bill was the right mechanism to achieve the goals for a variety of reasons. In that I don't think that I think there are still many questions regarding affordability and viability of that particular service. That said, where it is possible, it's a very good solution for us to be able to embrace. But there's still many questions. Even last week, I think I saw some articles that there were over 40 satellites that exploded, caught fire, went down. It is still in a beta test mode, and it's still unclear what happens when more people sign up for the service and whether it gets diluted. And so we are not going to prohibit it. And I also think that we want to be strategic around where we can make it as available as possible. Starlink already received a significant public subsidy to be able to provide service in targeted pockets in Maine through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund through the Federal Communications Commission. So my sense, my general standpoint is that we should be strategic in making services like Starlink available in the places where it makes the most sense and in a measured and intentional way. I don't think that bill in particular helps us achieve that, and I worry about the precedent that it sets for providing that kind of subsidy to that kind of private company. So for those reasons, as I mentioned, I've engaged with Senator Stewart, and I've invited him to join an innovation advisory committee that the Connectivity Authority has established to engage with some research institutions and some private service providers to be able to identify what is the technology that makes the most sense in different geographies to be able to provide that kind of short-term connectivity assistance, and what's the financing model and the subsidy that should be a part of that. I think that we can do that without the legislation in place. And again, I worry about the precedent that the legislation would set. And I'm really pleased. I think Senator Stewart, certainly I'd let him speak on his behalf. I'm hopeful that I think he's planning on joining and participating in that working group. And I'll be making a trip to his district in about a month to be able to meet with him and the county and Rustic Partnership and several other stakeholders to get a better understanding of where their priorities are and what kinds of technology partnerships would make the most sense. I hope that addresses your question.
Yes.
Are you all set, Representative Foster, or do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just to follow up if I could. Yes, thank you, Mr. Butcher. That does answer part of my question. And it sounds like, and I'm not looking that that's something that would be provided for everyone in addition to fiber, but it sounds like what you're referring to would be an answer to some of those. We always use the analogy that there's a farmhouse down at the end of a half mile, a mile lane that, rather than spend, and I don't know what the amount is now, but let's say $10,000 to run fiber to that place. At least the thought behind Senator Stewart's bill was that, allowing them $500 to get going and it would be a better answer. However, in my area, and certainly in areas more rural than mine, we have many homes, residences that are located at the end of poles and wires for electricity, in that we have stretches of road that don't have poles because the next residence up the road 2 or 3 miles away is served by power, if you will, and phone service from the other end. And so that quite often that last house on that line is located significant distance from the next residence on that line. So that's, there are many cases where that stringing fiber cost per residence can be greatly exaggerated under those circumstances. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel the short response to that is just simply that that also, it's for that reason that we will be developing and launching some kind of line extension program in tandem to thinking about if a line extension is cost prohibitive or wouldn't work, what are the wireless solutions that would make the most sense in those kinds of areas. And data and maps and more humans to help with that kind of analysis and partnerships will actually enable that. And that's a big part of our ability to fulfill the governor's pledge.
Thank you.
You all set, Representative Foster?
Yes, sir.
Representative
Thank you.
Berry, you have more questions?
I do, just one more, which, thinking about Representative Foster's questions provoked, which is the federal government. You mentioned the RDOF funding, which Starlink received, and many private providers have been receiving federal funds separate from what has gone to the Maine Connectivity Authority and what we've allocated to Connect Maine. But one of those funds that you, or I guess maybe it was Tim Schneider, reminded this committee about when he came before us a few months ago between sessions, was the emergency broadband benefit. And I believe that wireless providers, correct me if I'm wrong, but wireless providers can opt into that. And residents of Maine who are below, I think it's 125% of poverty level, are able to receive between $30 and even up to, I believe it's $75 a month in assistance to help to be able to afford a wireless or wired broadband connection. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And just with a couple clarifications. So the emergency broadband, and sorry if folks are already up to speed on this, but just to clarify, the emergency broadband benefit program has now evolved into the affordable connectivity program, which now provides, as opposed to $50 a month, it provides $30 a month, which is, better than nothing. Part of the challenge of the program is it requires the service provider to administer the benefits on an income qualification standpoint, which has our internet service providers doing the job that large public sector organizations often find themselves in the role of doing. I think that's been one of the reasons why the utilization of that fund was so much lower than subscribed. I think the EBB, Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, had $2 billion allocated to it, and I think they had 20 million or less used. So some people used it, but not nearly enough people. And so I think part of that is the access, and part of that was the challenge. Now, our federal funds that will define the majority of work that the Connectivity Authority is embarking upon require that any partnership that we invest in is an active participant in the Affordable Connectivity Program. So if we're providing a grant to a service provider through our capital projects funds, they will have to have registered on the Affordable Connectivity Program to make sure that their consumers are able to access those funds. One of the initiatives we're getting started in feasibility, and I'd love to have in place by this summer, would be some kind of aggregated administration on behalf of the service providers to make it easier for them to administer. So can we as a state be a proactive partner with the private sector and recognize, this is an added level of challenge for them to be able to provide that kind of affordability. Can we help increase that efficiency in administration? I don't quite know what that looks like yet. It may not necessarily work. I need to get the input from our private sector partners to better understand how we should be designing that kind of program. But I think one of our goals is That is a subsidy that is built into federal funds that doesn't necessarily have to impact our funds, but would provide benefit to our consumers. So how do we make it easier to do? And that is sort of one of those initiatives that will fit into our priorities to advance digital equity.
Great.
Senator Barry,
Thank you.
any follow-up?
Thank you. And I think the 75% was for tribal customers only. Just to clarify,
Yes.
that figure I think still does apply in those instances.
I think yes, I believe you were right.
Thank you.
Anything further, Representative Barry?
All set.
Any other questions from the committee? I do have a couple before we let you go, Andrew, and I was very interested in both Representative Foster and Representative Barry's questions because they were getting more to what I think are going to be the challenges in this, challenge the governor has given to the legislature and to your organization to meet this goal. First off, do you see, I've traveled to many rural and remote areas of Maine. My grandfather was born in a place called, T18R7. And there are many, many remote areas in Maine. Do you see the goal of 100% applying to residential only or also to commercial?
Thank you, Senator Lawrence. Quick clarification. When you say is the goal of 100%, are you referring to the governor's pledge of 100% connectivity?
Correct.
And so is it applying to residential or commercial? Is your
or
question?
both? Or both,
Yeah,
yes.
I believe it's both.
Okay. And some of these places are very remote that I've traveled to. I have constituents who actually have a place down here, but they own a remote sporting camp and they are there year round and they don't have electricity. They have their own internal generation. So they don't have any wires going out to their place. They are in, and I remember flying into airstrips in Maine where there was one person there living in a mobile home, for lack of a better word, on the airstrip, and they had no electric connection, and all they did was tie up the planes when they landed, and they lived in that place, year round, essentially. How are you comfortable that? Well, I'm not going to put you in that position, but can you give me an idea of where you think satellite technology is now at being able to reach all these remote corners of Maine, and kind of what has to happen? Just give us a perspective, and I'm not holding you to this, but I kind of want to know where things are at as far as satellite technology and how far we have to go to reach all these remote corners in Maine.
Yes, thank you. For a minute, I thought you were going to ask, am I comfortable with committing to providing the airstrip individual? And I am not.
No, I'm not going to put you in that position. I'm just trying to figure out where we are at technology-wise now, because I think that is not a wire solution. That's a non-wire solution. And where is the technology at on targeting those parts of Maine?
Absolutely. So this is very much baked into our strategies and priorities, and that in recognizing that technology is advancing at such a rate that we should be able to keep the door open for applying advancements in new technology to the places that make the most sense. That caveat is the really important part, to the places that make the most sense. So one of the things that I've charging our innovation working group with doing is helping develop a methodology of the places that make the most sense for different technologies. I am not a low Earth orbit satellite expert, and I absolutely would not pretend to be. What I do know is that there are advancements that we should be considering. Some people are getting access to it and are getting great results. Other people are not. Other people are finding it very challenging from an affordability standpoint. For $500, you can now be a premium Starlink member. So that said, we absolutely should be considering how we can provide those kinds of services for the people that want it. And that's the other part of the equation. I think that was the other part of the governor's pledge. If you want connectivity, and acknowledging there are those remote camps for many people in Maine who don't want it. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I also think that we need to be mindful of enabling people to be able to, enjoy and embrace the quality of life in Maine that doesn't require their sacrifice of their professional or educational or even healthcare opportunities. So the short answer to your question is that I don't really know. And that's why we as an organization, I think, have the opportunity to be proactive in our public and academic partnerships to be able to better understand what our options are, and also make sure that we as a state are able to keep pace with advancements in technology, right? We don't have to fully commit to satellite technology to be able to deploy it in the places that make the most sense.
Yep. And so just to leave you with, I'm going to ask you not to respond to this now, but to think about this. Are we also committing to providing high-speed internet to people traveling in remote areas in Maine, not just living or working, but if someone goes on a canoe trip down the Allagash, or they're taking a truck into remote areas of Maine to bring out logs and things like that, are we also committing to providing high-speed internet for those people while they're doing those services?
I think
that's a question I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do think that that's a different animal.
Yep.
I think that, I think partnerships with our cellular providers, and again, this is where one set of strategies can be complementary to another, in that partnerships with our cellular providers actually should have an implication on some of our middle mile and backbone infrastructure and investments. I think if cellular providers feel like those are markets that are able to capture, and they think that they can do that in such a way that we benefit additional middle mile infrastructure and fiber backhaul, that to me feels like the kind of thing that would be a little bit more in line with the animal that we're chasing. But I don't think inherently that kind of interim or traveler orientation and strategy is baked into the pledge.
Okay, good. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, Peggy, for being here. And we'll now go on to our next presentation. Lindsay, why don't you just announce to the committee who we're going to be hearing from?
So at this point, I believe, were we going to hear from Ms. Schaefer regarding the Connect Maine Authority?
I'm sorry, Andrew, does she have something she wants to add?
Oh, yeah, I think that that's entirely up to you all. Of course, I do know that Connect Maine has a tremendous amount of activity underway, and I'll leave it to Peggy to share. And Peggy, I'm so sorry to have gone on too long, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to duck out and miss your portion.
I apologize, Peggy. I didn't realize you were doing separate presentations. So Peggy.
Well, I have a legislatively required presentation that
Yep.
I'm supposed to give, so I can blow it off if you want, because it's your presentation.
No, I apologize. I didn't recognize that, Peggy. So go ahead.
So I'm going to share my screen, I think, just for a little bit.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, so my requirement for the legislature is to give you an update on for our annual report. Two pieces. One is our annual report, and one is the very exciting policy and procedures that we have to put in place. So hope you've had a lot of caffeine. So this past year, we had a really sort of busy year at Connect Maine. I break these up into sort of three places. The first is our community support. As you remember, in 2015, the legislature gave Connect Maine the authority and the responsibility to start a community planning effort. And we have essentially refined the community planning effort just about with every round, right? We learned something and we changed the application. And so the couple pieces that we created this year, we've instituted what we call a statewide community of practice with community boosters. And what this is, we've been providing community planning grants for a while, and what we're trying to do is make sure that people who are doing this work in the community have the advantage of talking with each other to learn from each other, so the experienced people can learn from the new and the new can learn from the old, and maybe we can skip some of the potholes that people hit. So we have a community of practice that we're working with the Maine Broadband Coalition to put in place. They meet, I think, monthly for about an hour. And they talk over a whole variety of activities. So they do, it's a huge piece about learning from each other. We're also putting in place a group called Community Boosters. And those are they're probably going to be one person per county. And it's intended to add capacity to the community planning activity. So the Community Boosters are essentially a stipend position. They're not a full-time position. There is a stipend for to add capacity to the organizations that are doing this work. This is an idea actually we got from Land O'Lakes out in the Midwest. They're doing something similar to this. And when we looked at it, we thought this is a help, right? This is going to help us continue to move these community conversations forward and down the road. Last year, we implemented a crowdsourcing. And I think we have, I don't know, 27,000 crowdsourced tests right now. Again, we put this in place in a large part because we really wanted, we know that identifying what areas are served and unserved down to the street level, right, has always been a sort of a block. And so this gives those communities a chance to not only engage their neighbors in this conversation, which is really important, but also get an idea of where actually service is and service isn't in their town. So this crowdsourced speed testing has been helpful. We have added that data both to our broadband intelligence platform as well as the federal NTIA platform, which is called the National Broadband Availability Map. We've been working with Vetro Fiber, who is our broadband intelligence platform provider, and they have been working. They've been working with 10 communities, giving them access to the broadband to their mapping network, so that those communities can really begin to have essentially the same technology that an ISP would have. So again, we're trying to figure out how to layer in this support so these communities have the knowledge and understanding to really move these conversations forward. We, like I said, have revamped planning grants, I think 4 times. One of the things we did was we used to have phase 1 that you had to do, right? We dumped the phase 1 and started with what we're calling startup grants, which every month towns can come in and say, we'd like to start this process. Here's here's what we'd like to think about doing. We write them a check. There's no scoring process. It's a very simple application. We write them a check. We put the contract in place. It says, here are the things you need to do. And it puts them in a place where they can come in for a phase 2 much faster. We've provided 20 community planning grants this past year, all across the state. And just recently, we've started a technical assistance portal for broadband utility districts. At our February meeting next week, the board will be looking at an RFP to provide technical assistance to those broadband utility districts. So rather than get them into the sort of competitive community grant process, we're going to have a special, like I call it, door number 3, where if you're a broadband utility district, we have a technical assistance platform in place, including consultants, to work with you through this process if you're interested in that. So those are kinds of the efforts that we've been trying to do to expand community support. For infrastructure, we put in place a number of things this year. One of the things that we talked about when we did the general fund obligation bond was that we were going to have to get a lot more, we were going to do a lot more follow-up with people who get grants, right? So we put in a verification and validation process. This process not only on the front end of the grant in terms of making sure they're eligible, making sure they meet the requirements, making sure that their technology is up to stuff, and also making sure that that their cost per pass is within the industry standards. On the back end, we have a validation process, which is when they submit invoices to us to get reimbursed, it has to be an invoice. It has to be an invoice of what they bought. This is state fund bond money that we're paying interest on, and we want to make sure that we know what we're paying for. Also, when these projects are done, we are sending out a field team to look to make sure that what they built meets industry standards and matches what they said they were going to build in the grant. The Broadband Intelligence Platform is a pretty extensive platform that we've used. I will have to say we've just barely hit probably 20% of the capacity of what that grant program can do, what that platform can do. We are using it in this particular round of infrastructure grants to identify areas that you're going to serve. You draw them on a map, and it tells us how many locations are unserved, how many are least served, so under 25.3, how many are underserved. And that's the calculation we use when we look at what you're doing when you're applying for a grant. We also are using that platform to make sure that we are not leaving orphans, right? So that people aren't picking out sort of an area that's easy to serve and leaving the people that are harder to serve off, which means they're much harder to get to next time. We have revamped our grant process. I urge you to look online at our grant. We got a lot of feedback about different things that we should be doing in our grant process, and we have adopted most of them. We are looking at cost per pass in a density format. We are giving a higher priority to applications that are a majority of which are under 25.3. We are taking into consideration community contribution based on their property value. So communities that have sort of a lower ability to tax, we are providing them extra weight for the funding they put in. So we're doing a whole variety of things in our infrastructure grant process that are different than what we've done before and really emphasize the sort of policy goals that we have in place as a state. Was it just last winter? We did $6.5 million of projects in 11 weeks, which is, I gotta say, a record time with CARES funding. And if you all remember the CARES funding, it was supposed to run out December 31st of 2020 and on December. And so people rushed, right? These were not inexpensive builds because we had to pay double overtime to get people to do them, right? And on December 29th, Congress extended the deadline for a year. So that was nice. We also had our first round of grant applications in March, and we funded $8.5 million of the bond issue. We had 19 projects and we're covering 11,000 locations. Those projects are ongoing. You know, if you follow Bill Varney on Facebook, you will see him putting up fiber all around Rockwood and up to Jackman. That's one of those projects. We also applied for a $28 million NTIA grant, which is 7 different project areas that range from Rangeley to Idaho. We have 3 different providers and 3 municipal projects in that grant. We are still waiting to hear whether we've got it or not. That project will cover 15,000 locations. So that's about $2,000 a pass. That we use the Broadband Intelligence Platform very extensively in that process, both to answer to the challenges that were provided to the areas that we were going to serve, as well as to identify areas that met the NTIA priorities. We currently have a $16.5 million grant run open, which is a combination, as Andrew said, of our last of our general fund, about $6.5 million, and $10 million from the Maine Connectivity Authority of their American Rescue Plan funds. Digital inclusion, we worked with CDBG and the National Digital Equity Center. We augmented a grant that CDBG had given them for tablets to include we paid for laptops for people who needed laptops. We helped the Passamaquoddy at Pleasant Point apply for a $2.5 million digital inclusion project through NTA. That is also still pending. And we have been working to publicize the EBB program and shifting now to the American, to whatever that is, the ACP program. That, as Andrew said, there's some federal requirements around that FCC has tried to fix as they shifted from the EBB to the ACP program, which includes a lot more support to get people connected. So that's really important. Now for the really exciting stuff. Our policy and procedure manual. So we did adopt, these years sort of blur after a minute. We did adopt new policy and procedures, I believe, last in February of 2021. It turns out we didn't really have, we had the bare bones that you need for statutory requirements for an independent agency, but we didn't really have the in-depth procedures that we really needed. And once we began to look at doing contracts and, beyond what we normally do, we knew we needed to put new processes in place. So we actually know pride in authorship here. We went to FAME and said, the IDEA committee has liked your policy and procedures. Can you send them to us? And we essentially adopted FAME's policy and procedures. So they're very good. They're very comprehensive, and it puts in place specific procurement processes. It outlines what needs to be part of an RFP. It puts in place specific improvement for payment process for all invoices. And finally, we set up a process where the board chair, who signs off on most of this stuff, can set a designee if that person is out of pocket or there is potential conflict of interest. So I think you have our annual report that we provided to the legislature, as well as the details on this policy and procedures. We did make some exceptions last year in the policy and procedure process. One was the crowdsourced speed testing, which was a $30,000 contract with Greater Portland Council of Governments. We brought on board, I forget the name now, the Consensus Building Institute, to do a public outreach around our grants, and also a public outreach for Maine Connectivity Authority. And finally, we had to do these two things. Halfway through last year, we discovered, we had, I don't know if you remember, we moved into state government in 2019, so that all of our funding would go through state government. We, about 3/4 of the way through the year, because the comptroller's office came back to us and said we couldn't do that. We had to actually move back outside of state government. So we recontracted with the company that we had before, Solix, who does all the assessments that we do, that we connect to go back to do our financing. And the final no contract award was with an auditor. And again, we had to, because we had to move back outside of state government, we had to have an outside, and we're a public entity, we had to have an audit. And because we got federal money, we had to have a federal audit. And so we, there was a very limited time period to do that. So we contracted with the people who had done our audit for the past 10 years. So those are the two exceptions we made to our process. So the next thing that we've worked on is actually a 6-month strategy with MCA. I mean, the legislation required that we come back to you with a report. This is it. We have a 6-month strategy. We did this sort of because things are changing so rapidly with federal funding coming in and the work that needed to be done. Essentially, the 6-month strategy is that Connect Maine will continue the work that we've been doing for the next 6 months, which is now till June, right? So we're going to do the last mile grants. We're going to continue the community planning process. We're going to continue to do that kind of policy outreach, community engagement. We continue with the tools that we put in place that will move over to MCA in the summer, and that essentially, I mean, Andrew, Stephanie, and I meet, I couldn't tell you how many times a week. It is at least once a day, maybe more. We have a meeting in 20 minutes. So, we have been working incredibly closely together. There's only 3 of us, right? So when we talk about sort of duplications and overhead, there's only 3 of us. So there's not a lot of duplication going on. And there's also not a lot of overhead going on. So we are building this strategy as we go. It's a very cooperative relationship. Our goal has been very clearly not to disrupt the marketplace. We have built up a little bit of head of steam here, and our goal is to keep pushing that head of steam forward. So that's my report.
Great. Thank you very much, Peggy. Are there questions from the committee for Ms. Schaefer? Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Schaefer, for the update and the presentation and the annual report and all of your hard work. It's really impressive to see how much has been accomplished in the past year. I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond directly to the question that I posed to President Butcher around the governor's pledge to make sure that, within 2 years that every person in Maine who wants a high-speed connection will be able to have it. And just to address, in particular, I mean, obviously the feasibility of that, and in particular, what specifically legislators can do to help make sure that we accomplish that challenge, rise to that challenge.
So a couple things. When we were all together and asked about this pledge, what we looked at was what our who we've covered recently, what our unserved number was. So this is the unserved number. So we have about 80,000 locations in the state that are unserved. It's about 12%. When we looked at sort of what we have been sort of, let's call it paying, or what the cost per pass has been, it's been about $2,000 in the per cost per pass. So we did just quick math, right? If we do this and this and this, we have enough money to do it. And I think we have enough, we know enough about the locations to do it. So I think we felt comfortable that make a pledge of making sure that everybody that wanted a connection could get one was a reasonable one, right? And you've had this long conversation already about alternate technologies and people at the very end of the road and the sporting camp, so we won't go there, but that's all sort of part of the conversation. We have a lot of work to do, right? And so I would say that there is, over the past 5 years, this legislature has taken a lot of proactive step to move us forward. The community planning piece, the broadband utility district, the revenue ability for revenue generating things to include broadband, giving the more authority to the PUC on pole attachment, the process PUC has undergone around pole attachment. That's not done yet, but it's moving forward. We have a lot of good policies in place now, and now we actually have the money to do them. And so I think for right now, we're kind of set, right? We have two plans due to the federal, 3 plans due to the federal government. One is for the capital projects fund, how we're going to use that first 128 million. The second is a plan around the IIJA funds, which is, I don't know, it starts with 100 million and moves its way up. And the third actually is a digital equity plan that we have to put in place in this next year. So I think the thing that needs to keep, not to mix metaphors here, but we really need to put our feet on the gas, keep our foot on the gas and put our shoulders to the wheel, right? I know that's a little bit, Dukes of Hazzard and Fred Flintstone, but that's really sort of, we need to keep doing what we're doing and we need to do it a little faster. And so that's the work. And so the message from you has to be to your communities, move, right? Make decisions and move, right? A lot of times communities just kind of, but we really want community to drive this process, but they have to drive it. I mean, I know that Representative Ziegler has been working with Southwest Waldo. We've been working with Southwest Waldo. They really are on a great path. And there's some very interesting things happening out there. We've been working with the Denmark area, a lot of great things happening up there. There's a big process going on right now in Aroostook County. There's one starting in Washington County. There's a lot happening here. And people just need to keep going. Nobody should take this pledge as anything but actually a challenge for all of us to work together to meet this goal together. So does that answer your question?
Great. Representative Barry, are you all set?
I follow up if I may, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead, Representative.
Dr. Schaefer, yes, it goes a long way to answering the question, and I greatly appreciate it. Can you put a finer point on when you talk about $2,000 a pass? I guess a couple questions come to mind for me. One is that means going past a driveway which could avail itself of that new connection, as I understand it. Does it actually mean take rate? And then I have a couple of quick follow-ups.
It doesn't mean take rate, but it does mean drop. right? So there's two different things there. One is the drop to your house, right? And the other is whether you subscribe. And those are, though they sound the same, they are nowhere near the same. One is a customer has to say, I'm signing up, and the other is the technology has to be at your door. So, and one of the reasons we do this community planning process is to increase that take rate, because, you know, once you build these networks, they have to operate, right? And so take rate's really important. And so that's one of the reasons that we really push this community planning process. So there's a bigger conversation in the community about why this resource is so important to your community, to get people to subscribe to it. And obviously affordability is a significant chunk of that take rate.
Senator Berry, you can continue with your questions.
Thank you. So you anticipated my next question, at least part of it, which is affordability. Can you just remind us what affordability standards are baked into that $2,000 of past calculation, and also what speed upload and download standards are baked in?
So we have this round, we are requiring 100 over 100. That's the adoption that our board adopted that in May. We put it back into rulemaking this fall. So the grants we did last year, the build standard was 10 over 10. But I just got to say, we are not ahead of the industry in Maine on this. We are not. We are following them. I mean, everybody thinks, oh my God, we are not. The industry in Maine has been building fiber for about 5 years with our funding. And so we're not over our skis on this, because we're following them, right? Our fiber networks are cheaper to operate and they're easier to maintain. And so some of our non-telephone companies like Pioneer and Premium Choice and GWI have been doing fiber for a while. A lot of our telephone companies are now, the traditional ILECs, are now trying to build over their footprint with fiber, which is not inexpensive, right? Because you are essentially serving the same customer base with a new technology that costs you a capital put in place. So that's tricky. And LCI has been with one of our most successful grantees, has been working very diligently to build over their DSL footprint with fiber where they can. And we've been very supportive of it, because they're a competitive grant process, right? And CCI is now doing the same thing. So that's our build standard. We do require a affordability program, and in this round, we are, I believe, giving points for signing up for saying you're going to participate in the American whatever it is, the Affordable Connectivity Program, as well as points if you have an additional affordability piece. We do look at the cost per service, and we had a couple applications that didn't do well last year because their cost for the service was higher than others.
You have additional questions, Representative Berry?
I do. So it sounds like there's a little bit of it depends in the affordability piece, and you know, because it's points, right? It's so there, you know, it might depend on the particular project and the region. And obviously, if I'm living, you know, 200 miles from nowhere at the end of a logging road, it might cost me a little more, right? So I don't.
But we underwrite
think
some of the capital, right? We underwrite some of the capital for that. And I will say some of the, you know, some of our rural builders, Premium Choice, Pioneer, and now CCI, they have very affordable packages, right? It's like $60 for a gig.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Representative Berry, your question?
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Representative Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Schaefer. You've kind of answered this, but I'd like to get some clarification. The funding, financial aspect of this. What I think I heard you say was that we can do what has to be done to meet the governor's expectations with the monies that we have or we have coming. My question is, how much of these funds are in place now that the state has their hands on versus what you expect to have coming, and how assured are you that you can depend on those federal dollars?
So the governor allocated, I think it was $21 million through the American Rescue Plan money. 10 million this year, which is what we're distributing in this round, and 11 million starting July 1st. So that's in the bank. The capital projects fund money, which is I think 128 and change, that's a formula that the Fed set up. And so that is, what we have to do is submit a plan to release that money. In other words, we have to put in place a plan that meets the federal requirements. And these are all COVID relief packages, right? So they have to meet federal requirements around that for us to get that money, but it's there, right? We'll put together a plan, we'll work with the feds, that money will be coming. We've gotten the first little chunk of administrative money. We're getting ready to put in the first what's called project plan for a larger chunk of money, including last mile funding for another round of grants this calendar year. And so that money's assured. The IIJA, which is the 42 point something billion dollars that's going through the NTIA, that funding, we are guaranteed 100 million of that. And the chunks after that are going to be based on a new FCC map, which is not yet in place. So we don't know what that number will be. And we won't know until the FCC numbers get in place. So we know we have 150 million plus another 100 million. And then there will be additional funding after that. We just don't know exactly what that number is.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Great. We're just about at 10:30, so we're going to take our break for 15 minutes.
Could I just have one follow-up very quickly?
Well, I don't know if there are people beyond you who have questions.
I'm
So
sorry.
I don't know how long it's going to take to complete with Ms. Schaefer. So why don't we take our break and then we'll be back at 10:45 and continue with questions for Ms. Schaefer. Okay, if everybody could mute and turn your video off, that would be great. Okay, we are back on with Ms. Schaefer and a report from the Connect Maine Authority. And I believe we were on questions. Representative Foster was posing a question. So if we could have Ms. Schaefer come back on, Representative Foster will complete with the questions that Representative Foster has.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for interrupting earlier. I thought Ms. Shavers indicated she had to be away for a meeting before we would be back, so. That's
Is she still on, Jason?
I am not seeing her here, and she's not in the attendees at this point.
Okay. Well, then we can go on to our work sessions. Would somebody please text Representative Grohowski, because she had asked when we were going to get to the work session on her bill. And Lindsay, is the other thing we have to do a language review?
Yes, language review on LD 1847.
Okay. So has anyone heard from Representative Grohowski? We can give her a few minutes to get back and we can do the language review before she gets back. Representative Berry, have you been in touch with her?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I have not, but I do see that Director Peggy Schaefer has been able to rejoin us.
Oh, she has. Okay. Welcome back, Ms. Schaefer and Representative Foster, if you have your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Shaver, very briefly, in regards to the funding that we discussed earlier, on your website, that currently reflects the funding that has been there for a while, since including the bond and your annual amounts that are available. My question is, should communities or community organizations that have looked into this in the past and maybe did not proceed because of what funding was available then, make sure and get back to you in regards to the fact that now a bit more funding is available? Will that increase, let's say, the funding that might be available to communities versus what was there before for projects they may have considered and decided not to go with?
So, you know, we had a couple rounds. I think in the 2020 we had a round. I forget how much was asked, but we only had $750,000 to give out. So it was a very competitive round, one would say. And certainly in this last round, last spring, it was again competitive. If you didn't score a 90, you didn't get a grant. And so we had 3 projects actually that scored 87. And I'm hoping all 3 of those projects come back in this round, because obviously they were competitive in that round. They'll be competitive in this round. And so, yes, if you've had a project that you've had hanging out for a while, dust it off, update it, and either come in this round. My caution on that is you've had to do provider outreach already if you're going to come in this round, or be prepared to come in when we open up another round, which will be a lot more funding later this year. We don't have a time frame on that yet, but this is that will be the first chunk of capital projects fund money. And so I believe Andrew's been tossing around numbers of probably, I think it's like 30 or 40 million plus potentially a revolving loan fund. So yeah, if you have a plan that you put on the shelf because you didn't think there was enough money to build it, dust it off, update it, and look at our application process to make sure you have the right information and get moving on it again. Absolutely.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Representative Foster.
So just to follow up on that, Ms. Shaver, will your, because I refer most of my constituents, the communities that have brought this to my attention, I say, you know, your best bet is to go to Connect Maine website and proceed from there directly to get things going. Will your website be changed to reflect what you just told us? In other words, communities that may have already been turned down or otherwise would have that new information, or are you dependent on legislators to pass that on?
No, you know, we are in we are in constant communications with these people, right? So we between the community practice and the work that the Broadband Coalition is doing and the work that we're doing, I cannot, quite frankly, think of a community project that has come in or that we know has been working on, and we know most of them, that we have not had a conversation with about time to get up, get back in and get going. So, you know, our web, I gotta say, I don't think anybody ever goes to our website, right? They call me, they email me, nobody goes to our website. I wouldn't either, but we have a really great outreach and communication thing that you don't see on our website, that we're doing all the time.
Representative
Okay.
Foster.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Representative Ziegler.
Don't feel bad, Dr. Schaefer. Nobody goes to my website either. The community booster, you're saying there's going to be one for each county and they're the liaison to you? Is that how that works?
Sort of, but not really. The intent of the community boosters is to help communities keep moving, right? So it's to add capacity in counties and to make sure that the community planning process keeps moving. So the community booster may come to us, the committee chair may come to us. There's a whole variety of ways that people come, but the whole point of the community boosters is to continue to add the ability for communities to engage in this work. Because there's just this, you know, they got to be meetings scheduled, they have to get providers lined up, and all with volunteers, it's sort of hard to get that going. So the idea of a community booster is to add capacity to those community planning organizations so that stuff can get lined up and get going.
So Ziegler, any follow-up?
No, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Schaefer, for being patient with us. Take care. Okay, that ends the two reports we had to receive today. And I need to see if there's a quorum so we can go into a work session. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's Representative Cuddy. Okay, it looks like we have a quorum. So I'll take a motion to go into work session.
So moved.
And is there a second? Don't everybody be shy. You're not shy on asking questions. Come on.
I would second.
Okay. And all those in favor of going into work session, just raise your hands. Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, so we're in work session now. We have one bill to do that's substantive, and that's Representative Grochowski's bill. We also have a language review. And is Representative Grochowski back?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So since you're here and you need to go into another committee, why don't we do your bill first? So Lindsay, can you refresh my memory on the title of that bill? It's the distributive generation, right?
This is LD 1819, an act to define discrete electric generating facility.
Thank you.
You had a work session on February 1st. Representative Foster had moved ought not to pass, and Representative Carlo had seconded. So then there was a move to table. So there is a motion pending.
Okay, I got the wrong D word. So why don't you go ahead? Do you have an amendment to propose, Representative Grochowski?
I have an approach to propose to the committee,
Okay.
if that's all right.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did send you all an email sort of in the later hours of last night. So no worries if you haven't had time to look at it. But what I am proposing here is, I heard a lot of the concerns about continuing to sort of tweak the program that's already in existence for net energy billing, because we went through a process to do that last year. And so I thank Representative Foster for thinking ahead to my ultimate conclusion, which is that we can, in my view, send a letter to that stakeholder group that we set up to discuss any kind of distributed generation program moving forward, to ask that group to think about this question of what is a discrete generating facility, and should there be any changes to the way the PUC's made the rule? Is there any merit to what is drafted in this bill? And put that to that stakeholder group for any sort of distributed generation 2.0 program, as we've been calling it, going forward, and leaving the what's happening now in the current program as is. So what I did was just draft up a couple bullet points that could go into a letter from the committee to ask the governor's energy office to just see that this is something that is discussed in that ongoing stakeholder group, and clarify that we would like the Public Utilities Commission to definitely weigh in with that group and work collaboratively to figure out if there should be changes for a future program. So to be clear, this would be prospective, not related to the existing program, and it would be just some suggestions based on what we learned from the public hearing and the subsequent discussions. And then we would vote on not to pass on this bill as is and just send the letter. So I don't know if people have questions on the content of the letter, or if it's helpful for me to just say quickly what it is, but it is based on the conversations that we've had so far.
Why don't you go over briefly what's the bullet points you mentioned in your letter, and then I'll go to Representative Foster to see his reaction to that based upon his motion.
Sure. Thank you for that. So, the first couple points are just sort of the background of things that that I learned and that I myself and others shared with you in the public hearing, which is that there has been a lot of confusion and a lot of requests for advisory rulings to the Public Utilities Commission based on the existing rule around what is discrete, and mileage being a factor, a first factor that then triggers certain other tests, if you will. So, the first bullet sort of acknowledges that that's the background, that there's a lot of confusion, and it's taking, commission's time to work through that for better or worse. The second bullet is that we recognize and appreciate that the PUC is trying to prevent gaming of the program. We think that's a good thing. And that would also be helpful to think about, are there any changes to those rules going forward that would be appropriate? And again, clarifying that this would not be any retroactive changes to the existing program. That second bullet specifically mentions that there, I think, there's been some consequences where different property owners that just happen to be within a mile have not been able to develop their property in the way they want to, or because they maybe don't want to go through the PUC process to figure out, are they allowed, are they not allowed, et cetera. So it sort of mentions the geography piece that we talked about. The third bullet is just stating, like, yes, we created the stakeholder group through LD 936, directed by the GEO and in coordination with the PUC. So it's just putting that fact out there. The next bullet point is saying that we, the committee, believe that that stakeholder process is the right place to have this discussion. And we would like, in the next bullet point, to ask the governor's energy office to include this charge and provide any recommendation when it comes back to us in the end with the work. And finally, that as a member of the stakeholder group, we would like the PUC to, actually work in the development of any language changes, if there are any, or maybe everyone discusses this and decides it's good as is. So that's sort of the bullet points of the letter content that I'm proposing.
Representative Foster, do you have any comments, questions?
Well, first of all, just as a technicality, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure. I thought we would address the pending motion first, but if you are looking for me to amend that in regards to Representative Grochowski's proposal here, I would be reluctant to, in that I believe from what I read and heard from the PUC, I'm comfortable that their current definition in statute and the way that they follow that is sufficient. And I would also contend that should the DG stakeholder group wish to take this on, I don't think a formal letter from the committee is necessary to have them consider it as part of their work. And possibly simply a request from a representative might suffice. But so I would, I will stay with my present motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
That's correct, Representative Foster. That's where we are procedurally. And I was seeing if you wanted to withdraw your motion and then have it ought not to pass with a letter. So we can now are still debating your motion. So we can, if there's any more debate, we can do that and then have a vote. And if somebody wants to propose a minority report of ought not to pass with a letter, they can do that. So why don't we go into debate on the motion? The pending motion is ought not to pass. Representative Grohowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address the comment by Representative Foster. I hear your point. I will say that I shared this language with the Public Utilities Commission and the Governor's Energy Office, and the feedback that I got, and I'm sure they would be willing to corroborate that, was we're fine with this. We think this is an approach we can work with. We're happy to continue having that discussion, and the Governor's Energy Office just wanted me to clarify that it was prospective only. So I made a couple tweaks to the language from what I shared yesterday with them to make it clear that we're not talking about the existing program. We're talking about including this in a discussion of the future program. So I understand if you don't want to send a letter, it's not binding. Maybe it seems like unnecessary, but I think based on what I've learned through this process and the experience that's happened in my own community, I see that there's no harm in sending a letter and just asking for that feedback from the group personally.
Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, just a procedural clarification. So the pending motion is ought not to pass, and that's been made and seconded. I can't remember by whom, but that motion is ought not to pass without a letter. And so individuals such as myself who might be comfortable with the committee report of ought not to pass should vote against the pending motion if we wish to include a letter. Is that correct? Because I want to make sure that I do want to make sure that our clerk can record this appropriately. And I'm a little concerned that if I vote against the pending motion, there may not be an alternative report on which the clerk can list me.
So the pending motion is ought not to pass, and you need to vote whether or not you're in favor of ought not to pass, and that is ought not to pass without a letter. Anyone voting against it will be asked if they want a minority report to come out that's different than the ought not to pass. And at that point, you or anybody else can state what your report is. And then the people voting against the motion will decide whether they're with you on your report, or whether we're going to have 2, 3, 4 reports coming out. Representative Berry.
Thank you for that clarification. So I would like to share with the committee, for what it's worth, that I will be voting in favor of the pending motion made by Representative Foster, the motion of ought not to pass. I will also be recommending that the committee approve a letter, such as has been outlined by Representative Grohowski.
So Representative Berry, I'm a little confused because we won't, after ought not to pass, there is nothing for us to act upon at that point. Are you suggesting you don't want to do the ought not to pass without a letter, which is what is the motion of Representative Foster?
Procedurally speaking, I do want to make sure that my vote is recorded as ought not to pass. And I don't believe that a committee report can be ought not to pass with a letter. I think it's either ought not to pass or ought to pass, or ought to pass is amended.
So my understanding is we can do ought not to pass with a letter, but if that's where you're at, I'll have to get a procedural ruling on that and find out if we can do that. Normally, what we do is do ought not to pass and say we're going to send a letter. But Representative Foster has made it clear that his motion is ought not to pass and not to send a letter. So if you're voting in favor of his motion, it would be ought not to pass without a letter. Senator Vitelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the hopes that this might get us out of this procedural quandary, I would be willing to vote against Representative Foster's motion, much as it pains me, and would then issue a minority report that we ought not to pass with a letter.
Okay. Any other debate or discussion? Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to turn to our committee analyst and just ask if ought not to pass with a letter is something that can be reported out to the full legislature.
As I understood it, I think you can have the ought not to pass vote and then a separate discussion with regard to a letter, but honestly, I'd have to look into that. I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe before we have a discussion regarding a letter, we have to have something pending before our committee to do that. So once we all vote ought not to pass without a letter, this matter is done. So if you want to wait and we get some clarification on that, I'm more than happy to. Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarity and to make sure that we have made ourselves absolutely clear for the purpose of the work our analyst and clerk need to do. I intend to vote in favor, and I want to suggest that we just do this together if possible, that we vote on one thing at a time. We first vote on what our committee recommendation will be. I do support the idea of a letter, but I would suggest that is a different kind of vehicle. It's not a vote on the legislation per se, and the committee can vote on whether to send a letter to anyone at any time without even being in work session. So I would offer to recommend a letter and ask the committee to vote on that separately once we voted on the pending motion.
Okay, well, before I'd entertain that, I'd need some kind of clarification if a committee can, do that at any time without having legislation.
Senator Lawrence, that's something I'd be happy to check on. I can't get an answer just at this moment, but if I don't know procedurally what would be best for me to look into that, but I will check.
Representative Grahowski.
Would it be possible to take the motion back, just do the letter for whoever wants to do it, and then do the motion? That way we'd still be in the work session for this bill, and then we could kill the bill and move on.
So that gets a little confusing because we'd have to have a vote to send out a letter, and then we'd have to table the ought not to pass.
Why would we have to table the ought not to pass?
Well, you're saying till we get the letter out?
No,
The letter
I'm saying it sounds like we're having an issue of the order of operations here, and because there's a pending motion on the table, we can't act on just doing the letter thing. So if the pending motion was rescinded, we could talk about the letter, vote on the letter, then Representative Foster could put his motion back out, then we could ought not to pass this bill.
Well, I'd be willing to try it that way. I'm not sure procedurally it is correct, because when a committee votes ought not to pass, the bill essentially goes into the dead bill file. It never appears on the calendar of either the House or the Senate. So
that's good. We don't want to put the letter on the calendar of the House and Senate. That's
correct.
Internal committee operations. So I think that's a good outcome.
So Senator Vitelli, do you have some clarification?
I'm not absolutely positive of this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I know from my past experience that former committee that I served on would fairly regularly send letters from the committee to commissioners or other officials to address issues outside of, but perhaps stemming from a particular piece of legislation. So I guess I would think we could do that after we vote ought not to pass on the bill itself. We could take up the idea of sending a letter. But I would
Okay.
defer to you and to our analysts to confirm that as needed.
Okay, so Representative Foster?
So I believe I agree with Senator Vitelli on this, and my purpose here is to kill the bill, obviously. But I do believe that Representative Grochowski has the ability to bring forward a letter, and then we vote on that separately. I think we, even in my short time in the legislature, we have done that before in this committee where we killed the bill and then just simply put together a letter and voted on that, sent it or not. So I think that seems right to me, but obviously we would, our analysts would probably have a better answer at some point in time.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with what you're saying to the extent that that is usually done as unanimous consent of the committee, in my experience. And here we have a divided question about whether or not to send a letter. And then I don't know how that's dealt with in a committee. Do we then have only the members say this is only from certain members? You know, when we send out that letter, I've never seen that done before. So that is where I'm getting confused, is that normally when we get to this letter point, we say it's a unanimous letter from the committee. Representative Kessler, you're waiting to clarify our situation.
Motion to table while we figure out the logistics of this. Thank you.
Okay. Been moved to table. Is there a second? Representative Grochowski? Representative, is there a second to the tabling motion?
I would second.
Okay, it's been seconded by Representative Cuddy. All those in favor of tabling? Okay, we have 1, 2,
Just for 15 minutes.
3, 4. And all those opposed, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the motion to table fails. The pending question before the committee is still ought not to pass. So with that, I'll just, if nobody has any more debate or discussion, ask for a roll call vote on the ought not to pass. Okay, so Jason, why don't you call the roll?
I think a couple of us had our hands up, Senator, but I don't.
I apologize, I missed that. I apologize. Representative Grochowski.
Thank you. I'm really sorry about, I mean, I guess we're learning a lot always together, so that's great. I do believe this committee has sent letters before where just people's names were removed from the letterhead. And it stated in the letter, you know, these are the members that approve the letter. I think we've done that before, or I've seen it in other committees done. I've seen it in ENR for sure. So that could be separate from this vote. We can deal with it another day, I guess.
Okay. I personally have never seen that on a committee, but Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be eager to sign on to the letter as drafted by Representative Grochowski with help from our analyst and to put my name to it. I don't think we need a formal vote in order to put our names on a letter, but if there is a motion to do that, you know, that would be fine by me as well. I do recall times on this committee before where we have done that, and you know, perhaps we can circle back on this issue and just discuss for future purposes of the committee the best procedure to deal with this situation in the future. And I see that our analyst has her hand up.
Yes, Lindsay.
I sent a note internally, and a vote on the bill is a vote on the bill. You can have a separate discussion on the letter. So if the committee did decide that they wanted to move forward with ought not to pass, there could then be a separate conversation about the letter. And if the committee is divided on the letter, you can identify who it's from.
And if it's a majority of the committee, then does it become an action of the committee? and we have to identify who is opposed to it.
I think at that point, if the committee was not unanimous in sending out the letter, it wouldn't be from the entire committee. So I think then we'd have to determine who was on board and who wasn't. But that's certainly, I'm going to get more information for the committee
Yep.
on the logistics of this process, just so going forward, I know. So at least with respect to the motion.
I have seen that before, Lindsay, and I think we need to get that clarified where members of a committee, but it doesn't come out on committee letterhead, or it's clearly from only the two chairs. That has happened before. So we can figure out down the road how to do that.
Yes.
Other hands up. Pending motion is ought not to pass. Okay, Jason, why don't you call the roll?
Okay, Senator Lawrence.
Yes.
Senator Lawrence is a yes. Senator Vitelli.
Yes.
Senator Vitelli is a yes. Senator Stewart is absent. Representative Barry.
Yes.
Representative Barry is a yes. Representative Cuddy.
Yes.
Representative Cuddy is a yes. Representative Grohowski.
Yes.
Representative Grohowski is a yes. Representative Kessler.
Yes.
Representative Kessler is a yes. Representative Ziegler.
Yes.
Representative Ziegler is a yes. Representative Sachs is absent. Representative Wadsworth is absent. Representative Grignon absent. Representative Foster.
Yes.
Representative Foster is a yes. Representative Carlo is absent. I have 8 in favor of the motion.
Okay, 8 members having voted in favor and 5 members being absent, the motion prevails. Okay, so now we have a language review and hopefully this will be simpler, but having said that, knock on wood, it may take us a little bit longer, but we'll see. So Lindsay, why don't you bring the language review before us?
Excellent. All right, I'm going to send that out now. So that should be coming to your inbox and I will share my screen. Bear with me one moment. Okay, please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we are looking at LD 1847, an act to prohibit a public utility from terminating or disconnecting service to a public safety facility without advance notice and approval. We had a majority and minority reports, both ought to pass as amended. So we will start with the minority report, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hearing no, okay. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so starting with the minority report, this was Representatives Foster and Wadsworth and Senator Stewart. So the amendment amends the bill to include an emergency preamble and basically directs the PUC to adopt rules governing the termination or disconnection of utility services from a public safety facility for non-payment of rates, fees, or charges. The rules adopted by the PUC must establish a process for termination or disconnection reasonably designed to ensure adequate public safety. And these rules are routine technical.
Any questions about the minority report from people voting on the minority report?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm on a roll now, so if anybody wants to join me in that on House floor, I'll be there.
Okay, so we're comfortable with minority report. You have the majority report also?
I do. Okay. Just please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so this is the majority report. This is Representatives Barry, Carlo, Cuddy, Grohowski, Kessler, Sachs, Ziegler, and Senators Lawrence and Vitelli. So the majority report, the amendment includes adding an emergency preamble and limiting the applicability of this process to situations in which it's non-payment. So non-payment of rates, fees, or charges for utility service. And scroll down. Okay. Next was including a penalty provision. Existing statute, section 1508A, gives the Public Utilities Commission the ability to assess administrative penalties. However, existing law, it's discretionary, and there are sort of various, there's a framework that the PUC would use to make that determination. So as instructed by the committee, I worked with Representative Berry on this language, and so I'll walk you through it's a lot of text. It's pulled over from section 1508A, but there are some changes to it, so I'll walk you through what those are. So this penalty provision would basically require the PUC, so it's not a discretionary penalty, require the PUC to assess penalties for violations. Subparagraph A paragraph A, excuse me, talks about violations of the section. They will impose an administrative penalty for each violation in an amount between 0.1% and 0.25% of the annual gross revenue of the public utility received from sales in the state. Each day a violation continues constitutes a separate offense, and the maximum administrative penalty for a series of violations may not exceed 5% of annual gross revenue. So that is sort of the general penalty provision. In the event that a public utility was notified by the PUC that they were not in compliance with the requirements of the section, and they were advised that failure to comply could result in a penalty, the commission shall impose an additional administrative penalty in an amount between 0.1% and 0.25% of the annual gross revenue for each violation. And then lastly, in paragraph C, it basically, in determining how much of a penalty to assess, the PUC shall consider basically the considerations that are in existing law. So those relate to the severity of the violation, including the intent of the violator, the nature and circumstances, extent and gravity, the reasonableness of the public utility's belief that their action or lack of action was in conformity with the title, history of previous violations, an amount necessary to deter future violations, and then such other matters as justice requires. So I don't know, should I stop there and see if folks have questions on the penalty provision specifically?
No, you can go through the whole thing and we'll see if people have questions.
Okay. And then lastly, the commission shall adopt or amend rules to ensure that any process or system changes made by a public utility to comply with this section are cost effective, result in operation and maintenance costs that are prudent and reasonable, and do not involve capital investment.
Okay, questions for Lindsay?
Stop
Sorry,
sharing my
I gotta
screen.
get to my hands. I don't see any questions for Lindsay. So is everybody comfortable with the majority report? Okay, so there's nothing more we have to do on that. All the language is approved, so you're all set to go, Lindsay. Is there anything else? Whoops, sorry.
Did you want me to, you'd mentioned earlier the committee just wanted to kind of give an overview of what
Yeah,
we've
I do
got
want to
first.
do that if you could, if you've got that document.
Yes.
And I kind of want to show the committee what Representative Berry and I are working from so you get an idea of what we have left.
Excellent. So I'm going to share, I actually prepared two documents, the one that we normally use, and then just sort of an overview. So I will share
If
my
you have
screen.
the sidebar, that's what I'm looking for, the
Yep.
sidebar you have on what we normally use.
How's that? Can you see my screen?
Okay, so yes, I can, and I direct committee members a question or attention to that sidebar. And the first section is voted on and needs language review. So the next section is needs public hearing. So you see we have 6 bills left to be public hearing, and then we have 16 that need work session. And this is the hold up here. So I'd ask you to review that list. Look at it. If you need Lindsay to provide you with that list, you can, or you can take a screenshot of it or whatever you need. And if you see a bill of yours on that list or your caucuses, I'd ask you to contact the people and see if we can get these bills going and get them resolved. And again, my suggestion is you contact directly Lindsay to let her know the status of that bill. So I see, for example, Representative Grochowski has, is it 3 on there, I see? Senator Vitelli has 3. Senator Stewart has 3. So that's 9. That's over half of the bills right there. So we need to begin to focus on the bills that committee members have that are tabled that we can move, that are on work session that we need to move forward. Any questions on that? And this is just me cracking the whip. Representative Foster, since you're the only person on from your side, if you could just look at what is on from your side and just give it a little nudge to Representative Wadsworth and Senator Stewart that we need to start dealing with these.
That will be fine. I'll do that if Lindsay would send me that sheet. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, that ends our work session, and hopefully this will give, when we begin to get people back reporting they're ready to go with their bills, it'll give Seth and I the ability to begin putting these on for work session. Otherwise, we may just begin setting them all on for work session with the idea that that will push people to get an answer on where they're at. Okay, we'll see everybody on Tuesday for public hearings. Have a great weekend.